This is Runehammer. Every 12 years, on the shores of Lake Rand, south of the great towered city of Grey, something drives the mountain lizards mad with rage. They swarm and multiply into a great herd that moves along the shore, driven mad by a thrumming vibration from beneath the stones in that ancient lake. The sound, a vibration created by the RPG mainframe. Who even needs the music when you just do don 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 don? Hey, greetings everybody, it's Hanker and Fernell back once again with the RPG mainframe here on Runehammer, and believe it or not, we have somehow already found our way to the end of April. We survived another month on Earth. Well done, everybody. I hope you made the world just a little bit more better than it was back in March. So here's to you, everyone out there who having a good, a bad, or a neutral day and a good weekend ahead. And let's just continue to strive to stay alive and to thrive. Oh.
Mailbag day. Let's go see what's in the mail today. Mailbag day. Send your questions my way. Oh.
So let's just jump right into them. The first one is some questions basically asking, hey, what is this Eyes of Odium thing? So if you guys saw, I put up a post from our Roll20 game last week, which was actually our second session of Eyes of Odium. But what I've been experimenting with, I guess you could call it an experiment, is just getting back to the absolute roots of what we do, which is DMing and doing a dungeon. It's pretty much that simple. The first session, I knew that sort of where I wanted to put my dungeon, and I had a couple of the ideas, the thematic ideas. I had my sort of my power word, which I'm not going to say because there could still be spoilers for my players right now. But, you know, I got my theme and my power word, but that was it. And my location, I knew where it was going to be. But then I just stopped right there. I told the guys, they're rolling up some characters, and I just asked them for sort of one-liners about their backstory. And then I just built the story of the dungeon, sort of how they get there, what happens, and why, right around those little one-liners. So just keeping it super, super simple and getting back to the absolute essence of the hobby in my mind, at least as a dungeon master, is just having a little bit of a neat idea, not planning this huge thing at all, not like having cool mechanical ideas or like monster ideas or any of this stuff, just knowing that I wanted to run a dungeon, need a little bit of, you know, magic from my players, and then just run with what they kind of propose, and that's it. And just keep the prep low and the fun high and lots of danger. I'm also playing all of the monsters and like using log tables and stuff right out of my 2E hard copy. So sitting there right at my laptop with my hard copy, and I gotta say it's a real pleasure. And that is not a plug. It's just, you know, the past year, we haven't been able to just play purely out of a hard copy. We've had a mixture of PDFs and stuff, and you all out there can know how cumbersome that can be. I find it much more immersive if I can just stay right in Roll20 and be building rooms while the play is unfolding and be, you know, cueing music and sounds rather than, you know, alt-tabbing over to a PDF to check a table and stuff like that. But the Eyes of Odium is really just, it's just that. It's just like a dungeon. I'm just going to make a dungeon, and you guys can cruise through it room by room. We'll maybe do 2 rooms a night, and, you know, just kind of go with it. And so that is what that post was about. That's what Eyes of Odium is. I might get it into a book format, or it might just wind up being here on Patreon for free as I go. I'm not quite sure. I'm kind of enjoying it for right now, which you guys know I haven't been doing a lot of DMing in the last few months, but it just comes back at you. It just comes and gets you. And then once that 2e book was in my hand, I really got the itch to just get back in the DM's chair and do the basics. Not a bunch of, crazy innovative stuff. Like I really felt that Death on Krell was really innovative and was really out there. Really fun. And those players, by the way, thanks guys. That was a session for the ages. But this group is just 3 super basic fantasy characters. You got your tank, your archer, and your wizard. I mean, it doesn't get more meat and potatoes than that, and just going to throw them into a dungeon and start doing rooms. So we started off with a big lizard battle. We had a big trap corridor. Really basic stuff. So just having fun. So for those of you wondering what Eyes of Odium is, there's your answer. It's really just me enjoying the hobby with my Oathsworn group. I would like to, in May, do another Immortals game. I've kind of decided that streaming them is not really the purpose of them. The purpose of them is to play and to play with some of you guys out there, some of the Immortal level patrons. And for the sign up this time, if you were one of the 10 Immortals who was in the last set of games, please sort of take a step back from the front row and let 10 more people step forward. And we're going to break it into 2 nights, just like before. So keep an eye out for that post in the beginning of May. And by the end of the month, we'll run those 2 games, maybe on a Friday and then a Saturday, or maybe on Fridays week to week. But we're going to do the same thing. We'll do a 2-part adventure where the outcome of the first group is going to sort of slightly create or put a tone on the second one, just like we did with Planet Killer. Now, remember with Planet Killer, too, that got into the book. So, who knows where this can go. But anyways, that's what Eyes of Odium is. It's just, a lot of times I find myself as a creator doing all the creating, but losing sight of what the doing is, of what the real moment-to-moment fun is. And so just kind of want to get back to it a little bit. All right, the next one is about ships. So the fighter rules and the dogfighting rules, space combat rules that are in Planet Killer, right away brought up a question, which is, how can I use this sort of chunks and the dogfighter kind of approach to space combat, but for much, much larger scale, like war cruisers stuff? Like me and my players are running this giant battle cruiser, and how could I get the same feel that like the dogfight rules have, but with this huge, capital ship kind of feel? And my gut response is just to make each player sort of at the station for a segment of the ship. Kind of if you imagine the crew of the Enterprise, right? So you have one player who is controlling, say, the weapons and the tactical systems. And so they're making rolls, and they have maybe one of 4 actions that they can do that they make rolls on. So it's like, Worf, fire the photon torpedoes, right? That's a player who's playing Worf, who's rolling to shoot the torpedoes. Okay, then you have a captain, the person who's basically like, deciding what we're going to do, but they're also making rolls maybe on leadership. Maybe they're interacting with the enemy using charisma like Picard does, but maybe then you're on an away team later, and like being captain is a little different, like Kirk, where you're kind of like a heroic sort of almost like a fighter character, right? But when you're on the capital ship, that's your captain. And then you have your navigator who's, like flying the ship, moving it around. Then you have your engine guy who's getting more power to different systems and stuff like this. And I think that's what you do is, so in a normal group, you have roles, right? And, one guy is chopping things with his sword, one guy is shooting from afar, one guy is healing. And you do the same thing, but with a giant ship. So instead of them in each individually in ships, they are all controlling one big ship. As for how to damage and or destroy ships, I would stick with the chunk method, but I might... Well, no, I would stick with the chunk method and actually keep it on the same hit point scale as something like a space fighter. So if a space fighter is attacking something like the Enterprise, they're on the same hit point scale. It's just you're going to have more HP on the chunks on the Enterprise. So if you think of the nacelles, right, on the Enterprise, that would be sort of the engine chunk. And like each nacelle could have, say, 20 HP, whereas like, and this is ship HP, whereas like the dogfighters in Planet Killer, those have like 5 HP on some of their chunks. So you kind of get that comparison. So if you imagine like a Veritech fighter flying next to the Enterprise, it isn't like a dot compared to the Enterprise. It's not like meaninglessly tiny. It's big enough to, blast the Enterprise with missiles and stuff. Like they operate on the same scale. But you should have higher hit points for the chunks on the capital ship, and its weapons should probably be a little boosted up. So if you're doing, D6 for a chain gun on a space fighter, then a comparable weapon like a phaser on the Enterprise, that would probably be, a D8 or a D12. So the space fighter is going to be a lot more squishy than the capital ship. But then I would also consider giving something to the weapons station, the tactical element of the capital ship, that it rolls hard when it's trying to target an individual fighter. Because that just seems very weird, doesn't it? Like, just targeting this tiny little fighter with an entire capital ship seems a little odd. So that's a hard roll for a capital ship. So you kind of want to encourage ships fighting ships of equal scale. So you want, like the Corvette to fight the war cruiser, but then you want the fighters to be swirling in and out fighting each other. And you want to create that kind of tone if you're going to take it that far with your space combat. So that would be my suggestion is sort of up your scale a little bit on your capital ship, and then put your crew, your players, into operating the sort of systems on that ship. And then just give them some pre-made roles, like fire missiles, this is again thinking in tactical, put up the shields, fire the missiles, fire the proton torpedoes, whatever, and then they're making rolls, each of them in kind, and working together to execute the orders of the captain. So I hope that answers the question, but it is a fun question to think about for sure. Okay, the next one is a real throwback. This is Throwback Friday right here. I don't know if that's a thing, but this is going way deep into the backlog on Runehammer on YouTube, which is, I got the craziest question, which said, what happened with that statue of Helm that's in the Cavern of the Lizardmen? So if you guys look at the first campaign encounters video, which is way back when, and it's this sort of lizard-infested dungeon, there's a big statue that's like 1,000 years old of Helm, my sort of somewhat inept fighter, my multi-weapon fighter who inspired the blade in ICRPG. But there's this big statue of him, and he sees this statue of himself. And he's like, what? But it's really, really old. And like, what the hell? But the dungeon is unfolding. And the question of how that came to be was never answered. And so I just got a message on YouTube that asked, like, what the hell? I need to know. Like, how can this be that there's this statue of Helm? So on the one hand, I'd like to tell you what my idea was with that statue and where that was headed. But in another answer to the question, I think it's fun to have a brief discussion about like the unknown MacGuffin or the open-ended MacGuffin. So first of all, you guys know that under Hath Ordur and under Westburg, there is this huge cavern, and there was a great elder purple worm down there that was feeding on a time distortion, right? It was like almost nesting around this rift, and it was like becoming bigger and bigger and more powerful as it's feeding on this rip in time. Now, this is the same place where Stills and the gang all came upon this thing, and Stills seemingly fell to his death down into the Underdark. But then Foxy and a rescue squad went down there in my other adventure to go rescue Stills, right? And then that was a whole nother deal that I did there. But we never really talked about what happens next, which is there's a long period where Stills is down in there and Foxy is down in there, and Zymer and Helm are left back trying to rebuild Westburg because it's in ruin now. So I didn't know this at the time when I did the Cavern of the Lizardmen way back when. But the story that I would like to give to that statue is actually as Helm and Zymer are rebuilding Westburg, they need to go basically sort of put some columns down in those big underground caverns that are beneath the city to stabilize the ground, right? And so they have this dwarven construction crew, And they go down there, and during this, there's sort of an accident that happens, and a few of the dwarven construction workers, Zymer and Helm, all fall into this time rift. They go back really far in time to this cavern system in a much more primitive time. And the lizards in that time are like fighting some primordial enemy, like a Shoggoth type enemy, and they have to become allies to get back home. And so Helm helps the lizard men like 1,000 years ago. So they go through this whole adventure, then they get the time rift to open back up, and they jump back through like in the D&D cartoon, and then boop, they're back in the present day in Westburg, and reconstruction of the city continues with the construction dwarves and so on and so forth. So that is my idea of how the statue got there of Helm, is that the lizardmen worship him as a hero because he saved them from the Shoggoth plague 1,000 years ago. Okay, so that's kind of fun, interesting little side shoot adventure there that could be a hoot to do. Always fun to move around in time like that. But I think the more interesting notion here for dungeon masters out there is that I put that statue there completely as a question mark in my own notes. I had no idea why that thing was there. But I don't need all the answers. What I need is intrigue, and I need things that lead to player questions or that lead down paths. Now, am I always going to be improvising answers on the fly to questions I don't know the answers to? No. That can lead to a game that feels like, garbledygook. It feels like, well, you're just making this stuff up as we go, right? You guys have all had that feeling before, and it's not a very reassuring feeling for players. So if I do go down a road that is completely unpaved creatively, then that might have to wait for next session if players really want to investigate more about something that I don't know the answers to. But to me, the more important part is that they're interested in anything. That anything in the dungeon is intriguing. That to me is the challenge I want to overcome. The challenge of answering their curiosity is quite easy for me. To me, the much greater and more important thing to put creative work into is that everyone is fascinated and having fun. And I think that's what some of these McGuffins can do, is that it's an odd item that is not explained. And especially this one, I mean, this is amazing. This is like 2 years ago that this thing was put on the internet, and it still has enough grip to bring this question all the way back around. So that makes me really happy creatively that little MacGuffin brought that question all the way around. Another time that this happened was with the mutation stone in the Moloch adventure. People are still asking me, ooh, what's the unimagined price that they pay for getting a mutation? Because I accidentally edited it out of the video. Now, I have my answer to that, but I think it's interesting that someone even wants to know or even cares, that they didn't just slide right past that detail as they're watching the adventure. It was interesting enough for them to still be asking me that question. The answer is that they actually have a little bit of like a mind link with Moloch once they accept his mutation power, and they can be compelled by him with like a charisma roll if they're like eye to eye or face to face, and they can become his minions because they've been tainted by his power. Now, once Moloch is defeated, maybe that is no longer a unforeseen price, and then you just have a cool little piece of character growth there, that they have these kind of tusks, or that they have claws, or, retractable spines, or something cool with no real cost to them. It's just part of character progression, which is another interesting thing, is just maybe when Helm understands how that statue of him got there, that whole part of his mind that was a little baffled by that comes to resolution, and he is made a more infinite being by that realization and by that truth. And that's a perfect moment to grant him a milestone reward. He knows more about himself now. He knows more about the cosmos. He's walked back and forth across the centuries, and he has become much more than he used to be. So you could even jump him 2 milestone path rewards at that moment. So that is the story of Helm, and in my mind, more importantly, the concept of an open-ended MacGuffin. You can put the coolest little oddball things in your adventures that you do not know the answers to, because honestly, you will drive yourself crazy trying to make sure you have all these answers plotted out, because there's so many different questions and directions that players can take things. I mean, you know how they are. They foobar everything. They're always interested in what you didn't prepare, and they don't care about all your brilliant prepared items. So this is a little bit why I'm playing with the Eyes of Odium. I'm getting back to my roots skill of just being a DM without doing, all this sort of publishing and, creating all this stuff for a quote unquote audience, but just me and my homies are kicking it for a few hours, and we're just going to, do some rolls and have a good time. And I think maybe I'm also in that mindset a little bit because now that second edition is done and out there, my creative mind is feeling a little bit of a rest, and I feel like I can just kind of hang with the homies again, which I got to say is a really, really great feeling. And I owe such a huge debt to everyone for helping me with second edition to get me to this place where I can do the Eyes of Odium and just enjoy the hobby for what it truly is, which is just running a dungeon with your buddies. Okay, so the last one for today to dig down to the bottom of the old mailbag here, and actually we're going to wrap up April here in just a second, is a question about fighting colossal enemies. So, and this doesn't mean colossal necessarily with scale, but boss level enemies. Now, this has come up several times. We've talked about it a few times. I've talked a lot about keeping a lot of motion in a boss battle and other things. And you can look back through some of the talks and some of the YouTube videos about bosses and also about dragons, and it kind of applies as well. But the question is about a really tough enemy. Either they're brutally tough where it's not fun and they just steamroll the players, or the opposite problem. You think you create this big difficult monster and the players steamroll the monster. So the question is sort of, how do I find the spot in between here where it's really hard, but it's not impossible. It's really hard, but it doesn't feel like it's trolling. It's really hard, but the characters won't steamroll it, okay? So the simple answer here is really work on multiple actions. Monsters that have 3 actions per turn are where the difficulty is going to be. And then instead of upping the hit points like crazy, try just upping lots of immunities. And the difficulty and the fun of the battle is for players to figure out what it's not immune to. So it could be silver, it could be steel, it could be they're only immune to magic, which is a very, the only thing they're not immune to is magic. That's a very common one. So if you're talking about a dragon, really go outside of just, I am a giant monster that you must smash, right? Like a dragon can take different forms. A dragon could take the form of one of the party members and banish that party member to a pocket dimension and take their place for a moment in the combat. A dragon could mind control. A dragon could actually be an illusion of itself, and the actual dragon is hiding in a nearby cove. A dragon should have like an anti-magic aura. It could have counterspell as a reaction. So you notice none of these things that I'm giving it are necessarily just like the nastiest breath weapon imaginable, but there are ways to force the players to think outside their usual tank and spank box. Now, on top of that, definitely give it the nastiest breath weapon of all time. A way to scare players is to create weapons and abilities with bosses that don't use conventional damage rolls. So in the case of the breath weapon, you could do a breath weapon that drops something like 1d6 human-sized targets or character-sized targets to 0 HP. It doesn't do damage. It just levels 1 to 6 people. And then if you have a big crowd of NPCs with you fighting this dragon, then you would up that. You could do like a 1d20 lethal breath weapon, right? Now, 0 hit points and lethality are not the same thing, as we all know. And if you're fighting something that's truly at boss level, you have to assume some power in your characters. And so I would feel free to really unleash some deadly business that stops regeneration, that stops healing magic, that drops you to 0 HP without a save, and a lot of these more crazy abilities. Maybe there's only one spot on the boss that can be wounded. Now, I don't mean to sort of use the podcast as a book plug, but I do recommend taking a look at second edition. And, it's also in the first edition PDF, to look at monster upgrades. So in the back, in the tables, there's a 1d20 table of ways to upgrade your monster in a way that's going to make it harder. And you can either roll on that table or choose. And I guarantee you it is going to make things vastly more difficult. So like the one with the mountain lizards that we did, every time it's hit, it clones. So anytime you do damage to one of these mountain lizards, it lets out this weird cry and another one jumps up next to it. And before you know it, you have 12, 15, 20 of them. And they're all doing attacks. And like, it is crazy pants. And that was a really simple encounter that we did, much less if you had something like that on a boss character. So don't necessarily build for complexity, build for, overwhelming versatility in a boss. I think a versatile boss and a boss that can defend itself by stopping all these crazy player abilities. And then, of course, the final one I have to recommend is strongly consider bosses that destroy loot and equipment. Now, if you're in some other game systems, that might not be quite as crazy. But in ICRPG, monsters that destroy loot destroy characters. They just undermine and reverse the progression that a character has worked on. It's brutal. It's like destroying stats. So consider that. It's fun too. It lets you give out your loot more frequently because you know your monsters are going to be destroying that loot, so you don't have to worry about world-breaking power levels. Now, as for something bigger, like say a Kraken or something, I would consider applying the chunk method. Think of it as a giant vehicle. You can destroy an arm. So let's say you have this, like the one in Clash of the Titans has 4 arms, right? So you have a 4-armed Kraken. It has 6 chunks, 4 arms, a head, and a body. And those each have abilities. So this thing, when it opens up the combat, it has 6 actions. 6 freaking actions. But as each chunk is destroyed, it loses not only the ability of that chunk, like the hand might have a smash or a grab or a crush. It loses that ability, which is normal with the chunk system, but it also loses that action. So you're reducing it down and down from a 6-action monster at the beginning. You destroy one of its arms, now it's a 5-action monster, and so on. And so that would be another way to a little bit get the players to go wide-eyed and seek other solutions rather than stabbing. If the players think they can stab their way to victory, you're not really playing a boss. It's just a bigger enemy. And so that's a good mental test you can use to see if you're really making a boss or just another enemy. Is like, can this just be conventionally battled? If it can, you're probably just making another sort of sub-boss, right? Mini-boss. These terms are all so silly. They're also 8-bit, but they just stinking work. They just apply, so why not use them? All right, guys, so those are just the questions that came up this past week that I wanted to answer. Got a lot of fun things ahead for RPG Mainframe in May. I look forward to it, and I really have to, I know I do it every time just about, but I got to thank everybody for all the kind words about RPG Mainframe. People really seem to be enjoying it, and all the encouragement and the great sales for second edition and everything. You guys are absolutely the best audience in the world, my peoples, my shield wall, and I'm really excited to just keep going. The one tough question that I have to field, that I just have to be clean about, I have to come clean about, is A Burning in New Haven, Part 5 is underway. I'm right now writing the Battle of Boone's Knob is what it's called, and it's this huge battle up in Nordheim. And I know it's been a long time since I've done a New Haven update, but this has proven to be a very challenging piece of writing for me. So I'm really trying to write almost sort of my Helm's Deep type battle, and not easy stuff. So I'm taking my time. I'd rather do it right than do it fast. And so, stay patient, but we are going to get New Haven all the way to the end, no matter what it takes. So if you figure New Haven's going to be, say, a 25 chapter book, we're coming up, I think, on chapter 8. So we've got a ways to go. We've got months to go on New Haven, and we're going to keep going. But just think, at the end, I'll combine all the New Haven podcasts, and we'll have one big audiobook file that we'll post on Patreon, and that's where all that work is really going to be worth it. So anyways, hey, this is Hankering Furnail over here at Runehammer signing off for April. And thanks, everybody, for sticking around. Thanks for your pledges. And please help spread the word about ICRPG and, of course, about Runehammer on Patreon. And let's grow the shield wall until the shield wall cannot be stopped. And one last thing. We got con news coming up. So I've got, I think, 3 cons lined up so far this year, not least of which being Gen Con, but there are some others. So watch for the announcements, and might be in your neck of the woods doing crazy con stuff. So keep an eye on Facebook. That's where most of the announcements pop up, but I'll post on Patreon as well. And Hey, everybody, have a great weekend. Have a great weekend. And remember, keep it real, don't steal, and you're always going to get a deal. Strength, honor, and beer. This is Anchor and Fernail, RPG Mainframe, signing off.